at a very, very high level, what we're looking to do here is ensure that, I guess, network companies are appropriately incentivised or required to meet connection dates in connection agreements, and that effectively there are consequences if they don't. Now, of course, that does raise the question of, does that create a kind of behavioural incentive to long date offers to make them easier to achieve and harder to miss? That's theme 5 on ambition, and we can talk a bit about how we think we can balance the two.
Yeah.
But certainly the goal of theme 3 is to send that signal, that financial signal, to say if you don't meet a connection date, you will feel some consequences. And again, I'll make the point again, we're not trying to introduce something that's in any way cost reflective here. Clearly developers entering the industry need to accept some element of risk, and the risk can't be all on the network companies, because that could lead to disastrous consequences. It's more the case that there are some GSOPs now at distribution. There's nothing at transmission, and that effectively means that there's no real sharp penalty or consequence against late delivery or missed delivery, and we think that it would create good outcomes for connecting customers if there was something of that nature provided for in the regulatory framework. We hear a lot of stories from developers, different case studies of different reasons why a connection date has been missed. And it's clear that not in all cases, but in a number of cases, it comes down to what would appear to be network company underperformance in some way. And of course, no organisation is perfect, mistakes get made. We recognise that, but what this is seeking to do is to sort of send the right signal to sort of prevent those occurrences happening as much as possible.
Welcome to the Connectology podcast. I'm Hugh Taylor, CEO here at Roman Taylor, and in these episodes, our grid connection specialists, the Connectologists, dive into the evolving grid connections landscape, often taking expert guests with them in order to discover, generate, and share insights that might just help you and maybe even industry as a whole to connect projects faster, at lower risk, and at lower cost.
Hello and welcome to a Connectology podcast. I'm Kyle Murchie and I'm really pleased to be joined by Alasdair MacMillan from Ofgem. Hi Alasdair. It was only a year ago, I think, if we think pretty much the day that you were here sitting with Catherine and I walking through the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is the connections end-to-end review. Maybe to kind of open up, it would be great to just hear a bit more about where you sit in the Ofgem team, and then how do we get to this point? What's the kind of journey so far?
Yeah, so good to be back, Kyle. Thanks for the invitation. I've come a long way in a year, and lots has changed, and in other ways, remains the same. Where I sit in Ofgem, so I look after what we call future connections policy. So we've also got connections reform, which is now moving into the early stages of implementation. Sort of alongside that, the area that I look after is really about the future of connections policy within that new reformed process, and the sort of key part of that, or the key, I guess, vehicle that we're moving forward with, is what we call the end-to-end review. So this is a review that we first announced in the Connections Action Plan, which I think was, get my dates right, November 2023. And what we always said with the Connections end-to-end review, so it's effectively a review of the whole end-to-end customer journey, and it's through connections, and it's looking at achieving two key outcomes: so increased standard of service for connecting customers, and timely connection delivery. And we've always been clear that we needed sort of the two things to work in parallel. So you needed a reformed connections process, which, as we see now, is underway, but we also need the review to make sure that the regulations that govern the customer journey deliver those two key outcomes of good standards of service and timely connections. So that's the bit I look after. So we're not here to obviously talk about connections reform. There's better people than me to talk about that. But the end-to-end review is the real thing here that we're keen to push forward with now.
Great. And it's probably worth noting, so the paper is also pulled out into 7 themes, which was as kind of how you ran the consultation last time.
Yeah.
It's probably worth noting as well that there's obviously a few decisions that we'll run through today, and there's quite a lot of material in the document, 112 pages, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So there's quite a lot of information that we won't ultimately get onto in this podcast, but we'll try and kind of go through each theme and get a bit of a feel for the big kind of decisions that we made. But also importantly, areas where the decision hasn't been made yet, more of a proposal based on the feedback you've got?
Yeah.
And if people just were talking about the consultation that's now open. So
Yeah.
is it open now?
It's open now. And I mean, appreciate as ever, like for a number of years now, there's been so much going on in connections. So apologies to everyone for yet another consultation. But the way that we've sort of set the review out, so within each of the 7 themes that we'll come on to, there's effectively a set of decisions that we feel, we have enough of an evidence base to work with, that we feel we can just kind of go into implementation. So there's things that we're going to be pushing forward, and we frame those decisions in the document, and starting work on those like immediately, like already. And then there's proposals for further consultation. So this is where we feel we need to go back out to industry stakeholders and just understand a bit more. And that the process for that consultation process it's open now until the end of February.
Brilliant.
So hopefully enough time on the back end of New Year for people to really get their teeth into this.
Yeah, so nobody has to worry too much before Christmas.
No. I'd be surprised if anyone even read it before Christmas, but everything else is going on. So
I have.
You might be the only one. You and lots of AI.
Lots of AI wishes, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll kind of go through the themes. Obviously, we won't, as I said, go into all the detail, but I think theme 1, starting off with theme 1, which is improving visibility and accuracy of connections data, obviously a really big topic. Something that's, to be fair, has been improving over time. You see a lot of information in open data portals at DNO level, for example. There is expectation that there'll be more information coming out at transmission level with the likes of the transitional plans and SSCP, etc., more data coming out. But of course, there's a bit of a challenge at the moment and the kind of lack of transparency, and maybe other areas where data could be drawn out, other quality challenges as well. So can you maybe just kind of summarise, so what's the first kind of couple of key decisions that...
Yeah, so this is about accuracy and visibility of connections data, and like you said, networks have done a lot of really good work already on data accuracy and visibility, and we just see this as like an extension of that. So it's just introducing some new regulatory requirements to sort of make that even better. And in some cases, just sort of back in a regulatory requirement that ensures networks have a requirement to do what they're actually already doing in some cases. So the real proposals here are, we'd like to see, I guess, more coordination between the different DNOs and TOs as to the types of data that they're publishing, and the frequency with which they're publishing it. So, let's sort of see the networks sort of operate to the standard of the network company that might already be doing this to the best level. So lots of what we want to see is lots of industry collaboration to sort of get to a point where you have agreed data, agreed sort of frequencies, and then, in collaboration with developers and maybe even third parties who, want to see this data published because they can then, innovate with it and develop solutions that would benefit connecting customers. And therefore, because the more data that we have available and the better quality it is, the better informed then the customers that are seeking to connect to the grid are, and the sort of smoother their journey through the process, and the less sort of hand-holding maybe that the network company will need to do with them because they've got a more informed customer. So there's really a win-win. In terms of like specific proposals, so demand capacity register.
Yeah, we saw that. That was a fantastic thing to kind of read as we're kind of running through, because that's something that's been raised by a lot of the development community for a while, and we think it's going to have a real big benefit as well, because if people have visibility of what are the demands in that area, you can quite quickly work out what are the capacity now. Obviously with the SSCP in the future as well, and the RESPs, that'll help coordinate an understanding of what will be there, what's there now, what's going to be there in the future, and what additional work needs to be triggered, and actually I think reduce quite a lot of discussion and potential interest in certain areas from demand customers. So I think that's a really good move. So what's the mechanism for doing that then, for getting that data released? So
we'll move into immediately into a phase of sort of working closely with the network companies, through a series of workshops. to understand how this could be sort of brought into practice. And we also need to think about where it sits in the regulatory framework. I I guess that is another point around the data accuracy and visibility. There are lots of existing requirements on network companies, and to sort of produce certain tools to a certain standard and provide certain data. So I think there's a visibility piece there, and a potential pulling together, if you like, of where the different regulations sit and making sure it's transparent, like what is required on regulated parties in terms of data provision. And as part of that, we'll be thinking about where an appropriate home would be to sort of bring in a requirement for a demand capacity register.
Yep.
So there's two things are, how is it developed? That's what we'll work with industry on. And then, we'll think about how to appropriately require it.
Yeah. Okay. I think on that, you mentioned as well workshops and having kind of networks convening workshops with industry. It's interesting because quite recently there's been a bit of talk around a possible opportunity, not necessarily just the need, but also the opportunity of having something similar to what would have once been the DER steering group, DER connection steering group. Obviously, the reason that went away was because the DNOs took on an awful lot more of that engagement directly, which is worked well in certain areas, but it doesn't have the ability to, as we'll get everybody around the table. So developers are coming in, and other stakeholders want to come in around the table with the DNOs in one room, kind of coordinated maybe by the ENA. Then that type of coordination might be a really good place as well to draw out data requirements and kind of what's needed for. We talk about connections, but of course we're really talking about everything from feasibility all the way through to energisation and beyond, into the operational phase. So quite a kind of vast array of potential information.
Yeah, and absolutely. We are talking about the entire the connection customer journey here. So you're right. The ENA do a great job of like coordinating, the network companies sort of, and then sort of working to a common exam question or a particular outcome, and fostering that collaboration. And what we'll be seeking for them to do here, and I know ENA would want to do this anyway, but to bring in the developer community and really understand what data do they need for their needs, at what frequency, etc. And then I think the really sort of good thing about lots of the proposals and decisions we're setting out here is that we already have a very well established sort of governance framework for moving sort of actions through the process following the Connections Action Plan. So we have the Connections Delivery Board, which is a sort of strategic group that seek to ensure or hold action holders to account against delivery. So off the back of the end-to-end review, we'll be establishing a new sort of actions tracker that will then be tracked through the Connections Delivery Board. And ENA's SCG report into that board. So I'd see that the kind of ENA's role here is to do that industry coordination piece and then move solutions through SCG, and then it can be governed through CDB. So there's already an established framework through which we can actually start to deliver some of this stuff. Yeah,
which is great, and it's great using what's already there and what's already been working, but trying to, as you say, lay that additional government there on, so that the kind of tracking of all the actions through the process.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening so far. If insights like these are valuable in your work, then feel free to subscribe and stay current as Britain's connections landscape continues to evolve. Now back to the connectologists.
Do you think it might be worth kind of then moving on to theme 2, which is quite a big one, improve standards of service across the customer journey? So quite broad. But looking at some of the decisions, so the first couple of decisions around exploring the introduction of licensing additions to attach milestones to the customer journey. So when you're talking about milestones there, we're not talking about additional customer queue management milestones, are we? We're talking about milestones as part of the journey for networks. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we recognised when we undertook the end-to-end review that there's a lot of focus on the standard of service that's required at specific points along the customer journey. So let's say, for example, around the creation of an offer, there's sort of set timeframes within which that must happen. What seemed to be lacking was sort of additional milestones or standards of service, maybe at the pre-application stage, or maybe once the offer had been accepted at certain points along the customer journey. And obviously the sort of time to quote type requirements are very useful for two things. So one, managing customer expectations, and two, holding the network company to account against a specific time frame within which they must perform an action. So what this theme is really looking to do is to sort of apply that principle at different stages throughout the journey. And we've set out some examples in the consultation around sort of milestones we think could be effective for this kind of requirement. And we're sort of seeking views on whether that would be appropriate. If we missed any, are there any that would be particularly better than others, for example? And then, of course, the aim here is to ensure that, you have a customer that's entering the process and they're confident that, at pretty much every stage of their journey through, from the point at which they conceive that they might wish to connect to the grid through to beyond the point at which they're actually connected, there are sort of clear, transparent requirements. They understand exactly what the network company needs to do for them at different stages of the journey.
Yeah, and it's great. We were talking earlier about a particular anonymised example where, there is a project out there at the moment which has already sunk £150 million into its connection. It's a battery that's effectively ready to go, but it can't move forward and get connected because of a failure on the TO side, which they've admitted it was, effectively some investment works weren't carried out when they'd initially been planned. They only carried out half those works, and that's now been recognised and has been addressed, but it's not been addressed in the time frame of the connection date. So the customer has to take the brunt of that, and obviously we'll come on to implications of connection dates moving back, etc., in kind of later themes. But I suppose under this theme, that would be something that would be caught much, much earlier, where the milestones should be in place to kind of manage and have that transparency.
Yeah.
But what would, so if a TO or a DNO or NISO didn't meet a particular milestone, is there, what's the impact?
Yeah, I mean, there's options there that, it could be a simple sort of license requirement, which would then constitute a license breach. And obviously we could then, if circumstances deemed that it was appropriate, we could then enforce against that breach. Or it could be like a financial penalty, like a GSOP type payment that would need to be, automatically paid out if not met. So, for example, just to give a completely hypothetical example, we often hear that sort of following the sort of, an offer going out and being accepted, it might then be some period of time before the customer gets clarity on next steps, or the appointment of key project personnel to their project. And we want to avoid situations where the customer is sort of left in sort of a bit of an uncertain space around how they should progress their own project, because they're not sure sort of what progress is being made on the network side. So it's looking to maybe there'll be a time frame within which a key meeting must take place where certain information is then provided to the customer, and then if not met, then the network company would then have to pay a penalty. I guess what we're not looking to do there, and this is a really key point, is to put all the risk onto the network company and say, because there are circumstances sometimes which dictate that maybe a milestone might be missed. We're not looking for this sort of sum to be cost reflective in any way. It just needs to be, as GSOPs currently are across infrastructure and retail, just kind of sharp enough that it changes behaviour and it actually prevents, to the extent it can, prevents the milestone being missed in the first place. Because we're looking to sort of prevent here as opposed to cure. We're looking to get to a point in time in which all these milestones are met, because this is clear transparency on the customer side and on the network side as to the standard of service that's expected.
Great. And I think on that point, milestones, yes, there will be some occasions where milestones might not be met, and the example that we're talking about a minute ago around that battery project, transmission connected battery that's ready to go, is an example where that might not have been prevented. That situation might have still happened. But I think it's thinking in that for us, and a lot of the feedback that we get, it's also about, okay, if something happens and it's detrimental to the project, detrimental to connection and industry more broadly, how do you then move that forward? It's getting people engaged enough to go, right, let's get into solution mode and actually help find solutions.
Yeah.
What I think we've got a bit of a gap in is, okay, there's an issue that's raised. Well, okay, the next solution is let's close this off by putting in, fixing it the way we should have done in the first place.
Yeah.
Not necessarily looking at, okay, is there an alternative way now? Now we're in this situation, what could we do to kind of go back and manage? So, but it sounds though that within the consultation, there's room for that sort of feedback to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as ever with these consultations, we're really keen to hear both, general views and also to the extent that they can be shared, like specific case studies on examples of where, just on this theme, for example, if anybody could tell us about an example of where, as a developer, you maybe felt like you were on the sort of wrong side of the network company, for example, not doing something within a required time frame or to the standard that it expects. It's not just about timeliness. There's also a sort of quality of service question here as well. So any case studies that are out there where, it would be clear that actually milestones of this nature would have helped to sort of protect against that occurring, we're very gratefully received, and help us build up that evidence base to understand, okay, what areas of the customer journey should we really be targeting these requirements? What is a sort of measurable, definable event along the journey where you could introduce, a milestone that is very clear. If it's not met, here are the consequences.
I think for our audience, that's a bit of a call to action. If you're going to be responding to the consultation, then obviously respond in full as much as possible, but actual proper examples.
Yeah, evidence-based is always best. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. I think that takes us on quite nicely to theme 3. So that was the requirements and networks to meet connection dates in connection assessments. And obviously with this one, that's the requirement of networks to meet those dates, and then there's the kind of back-ended theme 5, which was then the ambition.
Yeah.
So I suppose they kind of come hand in hand.
Definitely.
So exploring strength in GSOP, and we were quite keen to see that and really support additional kind of GSOP extensions.
Yeah.
So you're obviously proposing to extend that to transmission, and the sounds of it also strengthen that at the distribution level as well, whether that's kind of visibility and scope. So maybe if you can chat through that a little bit more.
Yeah, theme 3 is a really big one, and like you said, Kyle, it does come hand in hand with theme 5. At a very, very high level, what we're looking to do here is ensure that network companies are appropriately incentivized or required to meet connection dates in connection agreements, and that effectively there are consequences if they don't. Now, of course, that does raise the question of, does that create a kind of behavioural incentive to long date offers to make them easier to achieve and harder to miss? That's theme 5 on ambition, and we can talk a bit about how we think we can balance the two.
Yeah.
But certainly the goal of theme 3 is to send that signal, that financial signal, to say if you don't meet a connection date, you will feel some consequences. And again, I'll make the point again, we're not trying to introduce something that's in any way cost reflective here. Clearly developers entering the industry need to accept some element of risk, and the risk can't be all on the network companies, because that could lead to disastrous consequences. It's more the case that, there are some GSOPs now at distribution. There's nothing at transmission. And that effectively means that there's no real sharp penalty or consequence against late delivery or missed delivery. And we think that it would create good outcomes for connecting customers if there was something of that nature provided for in the regulatory framework. We hear a lot of stories from developers, different case studies of different reasons why a connection date has been missed. And it's clear that in not in all cases, but in a number of cases, it comes down to what would appear to be network company underperformance in some way. And of course, no organization's perfect, mistakes get made. We recognize that, but what this is seeking to do is to sort of send the right signal to sort of prevent those occurrences happening as much as possible.
Yeah, so we're talking about GSOPs that will be more throughout the customer journey and transmission and distribution.
Yeah.
Interestingly, obviously you mentioned, and completely understand that it can't be fully cost reflective, any penalty, but interestingly, we are talking about potentially moving away from the idea of, limited damage, liquidated damages being set at 0, So That's quite interesting. When you've got that as a proposal, and you're also looking for feedback. So what sort of information would be quite key for rotation?
So we know. So obviously there are other industries, construction being a good example, where liquidated damages would feature as standard in contracts. There are obviously very, very good reasons as to why that's not the case in connections. Construction, for example, is a competitive industry. Here we're trying to regulate a natural monopoly, and we need to ensure that there isn't disproportionate risk on the networks, such that they remain able to perform the tasks that they're sort of set up to do. We do know of international examples where there are an element of liquidated damages provided for as standard in contracts. We've again heard from developers they consider that it's sort of odd that there isn't at least some provision for liquidated damages as standard. I think there is an ability through the CUSC that they can be introduced. We know that they're dominantly not, and we'd like to understand the reasons for that. So that's another area we're looking to consult on. This is when we talk about sort of GSOPs at milestones, that's something that we're sort of much more advanced on in our understanding of what we think is right and proportionate. Liquidated damages is a bit more difficult. We'd like to understand more about really what is the proportionality. What are the risks? What are the benefits of actually having liquidated damages provided for in contracts? So we'd like to hear as much evidence on that as we can.
So then another area of focus for our audience, where, as you say, evidence-based information and kind of feeding in on top of what you've also received before would be really, really valuable. And kind of just thinking about when we're talking there about GSOPs as well more generally. So, in our view, GSOPs can definitely be really powerful, but we have noticed that it's interesting as time goes on, sometimes new processes come into different network operators, different team sort of dynamics, different, just individuals changing. And actually, maybe that not being quite the forefront as it was historically. So, putting a GSOP in place is one thing, but what's the intent to have greater visibility? Like, would industry have visibility? Is it going to be more for Ofgem visibility? How will people know if GSOPs are kind of being met at an individual case by case level, but also more broadly across a network in the whole?
So, I guess certainly my main experience of GSOPs has been on the retail side. So I guess just to sort of give some context as what we're talking about here. So that might be, for example, if you try and switch supplier and your new supplier doesn't switch you within a certain amount of time, which I think is currently now 5 days, they must pay you a payment, which is a guaranteed standard of performance payment, the GSOP. And I think that's set at about £30. And it's sort of set out within the regulations that payment must be automatically made. So the supplier in that scenario has an obligation to understand if they've missed the GSOP, and if they haven't, just make the payment automatically. So the customer doesn't even need to know that the GSOP even exists. They just receive a payment and they're told, oh yes, this is something that we're required to do because we didn't provide that level of service that the regulations require us to. It's a bit murkier, I would say, on the infrastructure side. So whilst they do currently exist for DNOs against delivery, I think it's quite opaque, and I know that a lot of customers certainly won't be aware of them. And we do understand. We were talking about it before we came on air, that there are maybe circumstances within which the DNOs themselves might not be aware of them, and therefore they're not able to accurately or at all pay them out and then report against them. So what we're really looking to do here is, if we were to introduce new GSOPs, or indeed let's imagine a world in which we actually didn't, but we've still got this existing set of GSOPs. It's sort of imperative that it's understood by both sides, the customer and the network company, that they exist. And what we want to see is network companies taking them seriously, automatically paying them out, and then reporting on them. So that's the reputational side of this. If one particular network company is sort of consistently missing GSOP deadlines, we want it to be transparent that that's the case, and then they've made those payments. So we'll be looking at ways, and it's set out in the consultation, of how to ensure, performance against GSOPs is appropriately, transparently reported, such that, it's visible as to how the network company is performing.
Yeah, and that transparency, even putting aside the financial implication and penalty, is also really helpful because no network wants to be at the bottom of any table.
No, well,
So,
exactly. Yeah,
So it's got that aspect as well.
definitely.
Okay, I think probably on the same theme, if we just stick going from kind of theme 3 to theme 5 now, and we'll come back to 4 in a minute, on that kind of ambition of connection offers, because that's another really meaty one.
Yeah.
And you said, right, okay, we're going to have GSOPs and kind of making sure that connection dates are met, and we've also talked about milestones before. But then to prevent any network going, okay, well, let's set it out, 5 years in addition to what you could potentially achieve. You've then also got this ambition of connection offers, and we were really, we had been quite keen to see something that, maybe sets something on the lines of a range, or having just more information at the time of getting an offer. Even DNO level offers rarely come with a date when you actually get your offer out. TO connected projects obviously do, but it's often in April or October.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that you're not going to get all those connections made in either of those 2 months. So it would be good to kind of chat through what you've proposed there, because by the sounds of it, yes, you're absolutely talking about a window and some sort of kind of best case date, and then a backstop date. For a lot of our listeners, there are backstop dates already in connected projects, but really that there's no implication if the network was to go beyond that particular point, if it was NISO or the TO. So what would be good is a window where you've talked about more penalties around that, GSOPs kind of helping to maintain that, but maybe a window that can be set on day one and then maybe reduced as time goes on. Is that the...
Yeah, again, this is quite a kind of early stage proposal that we'd like to hear more about in terms of its feasibility. And I should say that, this is absolutely not something that's, being proposed to go into T3, for example.
Yeah.
What T3 has on the connection side, as set out in the FDs last week, or earlier this week, I should say, that was last week, sorry, is a sort of delivery incentive where, TOs are rewarded for delivering to a date, and then they're penalised, or they don't earn if they don't. So that's absolutely what's, in final determinations. This is a sort of idea that potentially might have legs in, who knows, in maybe D3, or it's something to think about for the future. But it's really a way of marrying the sort of requirement on them to meet connection dates, which is 3, and then incentivizing ambition, which is 5. And this won't be something that all projects are interested in necessarily. We often hear that a project might not want an ambitious offer. They might want a realistic offer. They want an offer that they can, or a date that they can know for sure that the network company will meet, and that obviously benefits them. But there are other projects where they would benefit from maybe the TO or the DNO being more ambitious. So is there a way to effectively sort of hold them to account at the back end? So maybe you'd have a backstop date that there's, for example, a penalty against, and then you could have an ambitious date that's ahead of that, that they could potentially then be rewarded against delivering. And then you've then got a sort of window within which, and there's different ways you can design this, but in this scenario, it would be a window within which there's sort of no penalty and there's no reward. And that obviously encourages them to be ambitious where they can be. There's various issues with, well, not issues, I guess policy points that we need to work through. So, currently you've got a sort of milestone framework and a security framework that's backdated off the actual date in the agreement. If we haven't got a date here, we've got a range, then how do you sort of back calculate those things? That's something that would need to be worked through. But we think, it's something we'd like to hear more about. Is this a concept that could work? What are those potentially sticky issues with it? And ultimately, as a developer, do you think you'd get a better outcome if this is what the network company were required to deliver you? And there's another side to this as well, which is then the point you made around transparency of information. Mm-hmm. So you, as a connecting customer, particularly if you're not someone who's particularly experienced with managing the process, you might see your connection date, and then with humans, you see a date, you assume that's what they're working towards. In reality, there's so much uncertainty that it'd be more sort of appropriate for at the offer stage and even throughout the process for it to be a range that's communicated to the customer, so they're clear that actually it's not going to be the 1st of April or the 1st of October. It's going to be somewhere within this, few months, for example, period.
Yeah, and it's interesting from our perspective, from a transmission connection. It could be even on day one, if that was as big as a year, 2 years, sounds a lot, but if that connection is going to be made 7, 8 years in the future, then actually having some sort of window where the worst case solution, the best case. And it's interesting because we were talking about this obviously earlier as well, around there are a lot of developers who haven't gone through this experience of a connection yet, and will be doing over the coming years. And we often see transmission connections, mod app many times before they actually energize. 6 to 10 times to change a date is quite possible, and that can be driven sometimes by the MISO, as that can be driven by the TO, could be driven by the developer. There's so many permutations. Try to get outages aligned when you're in the thick of it, finalizing your commissioning or issues happening on site. So we don't want a world, of course, where there's a fixed date and everybody gets a penalty either way. That doesn't work. There has to be an ability to flex and appreciate that time does change. But then maybe as time goes on, then that does become narrower. And as you say, maybe it is a couple of months where you go, well, we're only a few months away from energisation. It's either going to be March or out to July, but we're not going to go any further beyond that. So it sounds like there's quite a few different ways to approach that, but we can maybe, else and others feed into the consultation to help develop that concept. Yeah,
no, definitely. And the dynamic point is a good one. So, there is obviously, the most uncertainty in theory that should exist will be at the offer stage. And as you then move through the process, which in some cases is a number of years, then, as each year passes, the uncertainty envelope should be reducing. So the range that then can be communicated back to the customer is an ever reducing one. So again, just back to the point, you get a better informed customer with more reasonable expectations. And then you have a more informed range against which the network company could be either then penalised against the backstop or incentivised against the front end. And so it keeps them, it just kind of keeps that signal always in play of, if you do well here, you're rewarded. If you don't, then you're penalised.
And for the networks that are listening, I would certainly say that, not being in T3 in the FDs shouldn't be a barrier. It might not be that something with a backstop that's got penalties and GSOPs associated with it, that might take obviously longer. There's no reason why a network couldn't provide a range from now, effectively. That sort of information, and I suppose just accuracy of information is really key. Because if you took what was the tech register before the reordering of the queue, everybody knows that those dates on there, and there's many dates in the past. So how can we get to a phase where we maybe have dates that you need from many contractual reasons, but can we have that kind of continuous update on or regular update on date ranges?
So which is maybe a segue into theme 4. Was that your intention?
Yes, it was. So I've called it out. But no, theme 4 and the quality of connection offers, obviously really topical now. And I think a lot of people will be really keen to understand, okay, how much of this is something that will be in place before Gate 2 offers come out? How much of that won't be, and it'll have to come in later? And even if it's not fully in a license condition, what could be, what's the messaging out to networks on quality?
Yeah, I should say again, it's another example of where, there are examples with network companies of them doing kind of good work on this point. And, as ever, we want to sort of call that out. What this is about is ensuring that the customer is an informed customer, and when they receive, an offer or any associated documentation that might come throughout the process, it's communicated to them in a way that's clear, transparent, understandable. They understand what they're reading in the same way that we always talk about on the retail side of Ofgem, the importance that how important it is that a consumer, an uninformed consumer, can understand their bill, can understand correspondence they get from their supplier. This is sort of doing the same thing, really, or looking to do the same thing for connecting customers. And I think there are things we can do with the regulatory framework be it through a principles-based license condition or something more prescriptive, or both, around sort of increasing the requirement for offers to be communicated in a certain way, and to contain certain information presented in a certain way. Obviously, we're at the situation now where, just moving back to the process reform side, we're going to start seeing Gate 2 offers coming out in a number of phases over the coming months. Clearly, regulatory requirements like this, and we are consulting at this stage, take some time to implement. But I guess, networks have again, there's good examples of them, seeing a direction of travel into a sort of future regulatory requirement, be it something that's potentially coming in a future price control, for example, and actually kind of acting now to prepare for that. So what would the message really to networks is, don't wait for the new requirements to come into place. Do what you can see where we're going with this, so you can do what you can now to prepare for that and improve standards of service for connecting customers when it comes to quality of offer and information, now ahead of any regulatory requirement coming into play, which, for some phases of Gate 2 to LQ, it might come too late for.
Yeah. And certainly there's been enough offers coming out that we'll definitely get lots of feedback on those. And it'll be really interesting to see particularly the areas where, when we talk about quality, obviously quality is such a broad area and topic, whether it's visibility of information and whether it's accuracy of data through to kind of silly mistakes in a contractual document like a BCA. You can't sign something if it's in the wrong person's name, for example. So hopefully we'll see how that develops. But yeah, great that ask is there of networks to think about that now, noting that there's a kind of direction of travel published.
And I mean, you already called the link out there as well, back to theme 5. I just want to make the point again. I mean, for those that do read the the consultation, or
somebody will read it,
or at least a 5-minute read that AI will give you. We really do see themes 3, 4, and 5 as a package. So you talk about requirement to meet a connection date, the ambition of that connection date, and the quality of the information, I guess, associated with that date that the customer will receive. 3, 4, and 5 are effectively a package that are seeking to improve standards of service across the whole piece. And we see them working in tandem with one another.
So that brings us to the end of the kind of core themes that most of our listeners will be most interested in. There are a couple of other themes though, 6 and 7. Do you want to just quickly touch on them and the kind of high level points?
Yeah, I mean, theme 6 is something quite different. So that's very much at the sort of very low voltage household level. And what that theme is looking to do is to sort of improve standards of service and timeliness for example, a household looking to install a heat pump, or the driveways that need unlooped for EV chargers, for example. So very much at the kind of domestic micro level, building what already exists in terms of the standards of service and the timeliness requirements within which DNOs have to perform certain functions. So that's theme 6. And then theme 7 is all about determinations. So this is really about our role in the process, Ofgem's role as police, if you like, or as arbiter. So we have powers in legislation to determine and publish guidance on what we see our role to be as arbiter of the process. Where we have a role, the types of cases we can maybe rule on. And talking here, just hypothetically about a disagreement or a dispute between a developer and a regulated party about some element that relates to connections. That guidance was last updated, I think, in 2017. And obviously we're now in a situation where we have a new connections process, gated, and it's very different to the old world. So we expect the nature of things that come to us for potential determination to change. So theme 7 just sets out what we're going to do about that. So we're going to go and consult on updating the guidance, and also there's some things in there about what we'd like networks to do with their dispute resolution processes, because it's imperative that by the time a case comes to us, the developer has exhausted the process within whichever regulated party are dealing with. So it just kind of helps everybody get a better outcome from the determinations process. So that's what theme 7 is about.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I think we could talk pretty much all day on many of these themes and get into even more detail. But I think for most of our listeners, that's a really great overview of kind of the key themes that most of them will be really interested in. I suppose just going back to the consultation. So I suppose the ask is consultation's out now, but it will be open until, was it 27th of February?
Yeah,
I think it's 27th.
27th of Feb.
So there is time to kind of review that. But as we've gone through, there's really key areas where some evidence-based examples could really support.
Definitely, yeah. So, encourage as many people as are listening and spread the word. We just want to keep building up the evidence base. I mean, I guess just to sort of step back a bit as a sort of final word. I mean, we call this the end-to-end review. We don't want anybody to think that this is sort of the end of the process. We obviously had the consultation last year. This is really, I guess, ostensibly like an update. So we're sort of dropping the hammer at a period of time, and we're saying, here are some things that we're going to go and do.
Yeah.
Here are decisions. Here are some things we're thinking about, building on what we've heard. Here are proposals for further consultation. We then expect to respond to this next year, but in the meantime, we will absolutely be moving ahead with implementing the decisions that we've set out. So, look forward to ongoing engagement, and spoken to a lot of very keen developers and network companies on this numerous times already. So keen to keep that dialogue open. And just one more thing I would say, I guess it's a bit of an elephant in the room, is how does this interact with, T3 and ED3 design processes? It's obviously, we've opened up the books here on the connections process, and we're looking end-to-end customer journey. And it's clear that some of the things that we're looking to move ahead with interact with the price controls. And it's just gets to reassure everybody that, the processes are absolutely joined up. And, as the fair and reasonable regulator, we wouldn't be, I guess, introducing anything that creates sort of awkward, double counting or duplication or overlap. So, we absolutely see the outcomes of this process operating in lockstep with the price control setting.
Yeah, and similarly at the other end with the connections reform process and,
Yes.
and the steps that will be taken over the coming year.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alasdair. I really appreciate you coming in, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for joining the Connectologists in this exploration. This knowledge sharing is made possible by the support of our clients. We thank them and hope it will help the whole of industry to connect society's critical infrastructure faster. If you found this useful, you're welcome to explore more free insights at roadnighttaylor.co.uk/connectology, or click on the Insights tab at the top of our homepage. Thank you.